Brian, thank you for talking to me today, man. This is a huge deal for me. I was just listening to you a few days ago on Dr. Drew. I spoke to your wife Naomi last week. It was all so weird how it came together because I spoke to her the next day. I'm listening to Dr. Drew. I hear you, and you touched on a topic that I absolutely want to explore because it's one that's very close to my heart, my own personal history. So, would you mind just giving our listeners a little bit of your background?
Sure, and thanks for having me. And my wife, Naomi Wolf, I believe, was with you on your show recently. So, and again, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I am I guess you could call me an intelligence analyst by trade. I entered into the Intel community when I was 18 years old, back in 1992. Spent 11 years in the active duty military, mainly with special forces units doing tactical military intelligence. That meant I went to really uncomfortable places and spied on people to keep Green Beret teams safe. After that, I went into government intelligence with two separate agencies, did that for another decade. And then I went into something really interesting called competitive intelligence, which is it's kind of like the same thing, except you're working for an individual company to figure out what their competitors are doing. And I must say that job took me all over the world, including China, and where you learn the tactics business wise. So it's great for me to get that full spectrum of intelligence from the competitive intel to the military intel to the government intel to see how they all work together. And these are public-private partnerships from hell. After that, I formed my own company, a private investigations company, which was a lot of fun, and very important jobs as well. And it's actually how I met Naomi. Is she had death threats, and back in 2014, online death threats, and she called me to do her bodyguard work. And at the time, I'd been doing a lot of executive protection for a British company for a lot of defense contractors, ironically enough. And then I kind of rolled forward. And I got to say, it's providential because I can't think of a better person to go through the pandemic with because we weren't totally aligned, especially on China. She didn't believe me. But actually, she thought I was crazy when I say everything goes back to China. But I just kept giving her those primary documents, and I said, "Well, read it for yourself." And she's a great researcher, so finally, our points of research intersected, and here we are today.
Wow. So you guys have like a real life Kevin Costner, Whitney Houston bodyguard story, I guess. Hey.
Yeah, I would definitely say so, but she's pretty badass too.
Oh,
So I think she could probably throw a knife and make a stick into the kitchen counter as well. But no, I mean, a little bit. I mean, yeah, she was a bit of a celebrity, and I was the guy from that world. So it is a little weird that it ended up that way. And I do hope subconsciously I didn't guide my life in that direction. But in my defense, she called me. I didn't call her for service. So.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to touch on this CCP. I guess you would call it I guess, infiltration of Western countries. I shared with you before we started recording my story. I'm from a town called Richmond in British Columbia in Canada, which was ground zero for a massive money laundering operation that came into the province. To this day, in 1996, a single family home in my town was roughly about $400,000. Now, a single family home runs at about 1.5 million. And it's all because of the money laundering that went on in my town. So when did you first catch on to these CCP? I guess would they be considered psyop operations or?
In what respect are you talking about the way they're influencing the media or generally how they're coming at us overall?
Just their general influence in both media, culture, and politics.
I think the first thing, I think it really dawned on me when I was in a certain government body that I can't legally say it because I was a contractor and that relationship is classified. But I could never find a China desk, meaning there seemed to be no targeting of China. And I found that really strange. There was some overlap, like these guys do this country and some of China, these guys do this country and some of China, but there was no like, China desk that I could find in the places I worked. And that's when it really just it stuck in the back of my head. And then when I went into competitive intelligence for a major tractor builder and healthcare, it was a small company that had these giant clients. The way the Chinese would conduct competitive intelligence, say at a trade show, we would go there, and our job was to get people to talk to us and hopefully tell us things they shouldn't tell us. And the Chinese, they took a different tact. They would just flood the zone. You'd go into these giant John Deere booths and or exhibition areas, and we're trying to be all furtive, like telling me about this. They're just flooding in 30 people with notebooks and cameras and crawling all over the equipment and taking pictures and getting shooed out by the salespeople. I mean, and I started noticing that here. I started noticing, well, first at Oxford, when I spent some time there with Naomi while she was finishing some research back when we met. I just saw this tons of influence, and tons of Chinese students. And good for them. I mean, Oxford's obviously a great school, but I mean, an outsized number, like a population changing number for that Oxford community and all those colleges within. And I started noticing more and more influence. For example, the first one that hit me that, okay, these guys are active is when Blade Runner 2049 came out. Now think about that date. 2049 is the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. And that's what they call soft propaganda. But I started seeing it everywhere. And I had to check myself, because if you want to see something, you will see something. But I did start noticing in the movies like the soft propaganda in Iron Man 3, for instance. In Meg, there's always a Chinese scientist or a Chinese solution, and that's soft propaganda. But then I started seeing it everywhere, especially in politics, and it really came to the head. I would say it just seemed overt to me when Donald Trump took the stage, of how much money media started getting all of a sudden. And all of a sudden, NBC is attacking, a small publication at the time called Epoch Times. And I'm like, why does NBC care? This was the little paper in Washington, D.C. that I used to get for free in a newsstand. And so I started looking into it, and I said, oh, well, the founder of Epoch Times is the founder of Falun Gong, which the Chinese made the CCP did a major crackdown. And then I found unrestricted warfare. And that's the 1999 text written by two Chinese colonels about how they have to do something beyond, Chinese have to do something beyond kinetic war in order to take down the United States. And that's where they came up with unrestricted warfare. And like Fight Club, there are no rules. That's the number one rule. And everyone's a combatant, and everything's a battlefield. The boardroom, the schools, the message, illicit drugs, whatever it takes to take down that enemy, because their ultimate goal is to be the global hegemon by 2049.
Oh, okay. So would you say that their first target was media? Is that what they went after first?
That's a good question. I've actually never thought about what their first target was, and that would be something. So I don't know. Usually, I mean, I would say usually the first target is people. So in warfare, you always start with intelligence. And for intelligence to work, you need to get people on the ground. So you need to recruit assets. So I would say, if I had to guess, and I am guessing, but I'd probably say media was their first target, but before you get to media, you have to get on the ground and recruit people
Hmm.
to give you some audience research, so you know how to target. but then also to get people to influence programming, everything like that. And you create these relationships, and then you start pouring money on them. This is how you recruit. And then let's say I'm a CCP agent. If I want to recruit this local production company, I'm probably gonna go for like middle management and become part of that person's personal economy, meaning I'm going to overpay him and he starts changing his household budget because he has more money. And then they become addicted to me. And then he's going to introduce me to his friends and I'm going to swim upstream. But before you know it, I'm influencing the whole media shop. And I might even grow that shop to make it so big that a large network takes notice of them and starts bringing them more on. And then you see it just spreads like a virus, but it all happens with money. It all starts on the ground. So I would say media probably, but media, schools, influencing schools, that could have started. There's multiple facets that would have started independent of each other at the same time. I think everything started around 2003 is when I started seeing a major shift.
Yeah, yeah. So that's right in line with my own story. For us in Richmond, it started in 1996, and as a kid, you don't really understand what you're seeing, but we started. It's kind of the way you described it. It was like everything at once. Like our neighborhoods were leveled, giant mansions were built. By the way, most of them, nobody was living in them. They were just investment properties, right? They were just a place for them to sink their money into and get it into the
Like
country.
ghost neighborhoods.
Literally, I would ride my bike.
Mhm.
Like, thankfully for myself, the home that I lived in was safe. That wasn't sold, but I would ride my bike through the neighborhood at night and it would just be black, windows blacked out, nobody in the houses. And yeah, it was really the summer of 1996. My neighborhood looked like Beirut. Like it looked like a bomb went off. Like there was warfare going on because virtually every second home in my neighborhood had been torn down. And by the next summer, it was just replaced by monster homes and mansions. And again, with nobody in them. But what happened at the same time was businesses were purchased, and then Chinese societies started popping up. And these are just like little cultural groups, right? And what you're saying is it strikes a chord with me, because when I look back at it, I didn't realize, you don't realize what's going on. You're like, oh yeah, they just have a little, cultural group. They meet at the community center, 3 times a week. You don't know that these people have ties to something much bigger. And around the same time, organized crime started to really take hold of our city. Heroin and cocaine were just flowing into Vancouver like you wouldn't believe. And now we have a real problem with fentanyl. And the problem that we were dealing with, I've since left. I left BC in 2022. But the problem that they're still dealing with now is this virus, like you described it, has infected all levels of politics, all levels of media. So they won't acknowledge what the source of the problem is. Vancouver has a gigantic fentanyl crisis on their hands, but they can't go to the source of it because they would have to acknowledge that the Chinese organized crime is at the source of the fentanyl coming into the city. And if they were to do that, then that implicates the CCP as well. So instead, they just legalized everything. And it's the worst possible scenario. I mean, decriminalization is one thing, but
They
but
legalized fentanyl.
they didn't legalize fentanyl. They have a program that they refer to as quote unquote safe supply. And basically what that is the government handing out heroin to addicts, so that they don't die of a fentanyl overdose. But the fentanyl crisis is so strong that what's happening is addicts are taking their safe supply, selling it, and then or they're trading it for fentanyl, right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
so and part of this entire, I guess you would call it, scheme, has to do with our casinos. We had a huge scandal in BC because there were millions of Chinese organized crime dollars being laundered through our casinos. But of course,
That makes sense.
once the investigation went underway, what was the result? Well, nothing. There was no result, because I think as soon as they started investigating, they realized that this traveled all the way back to the CCP.
Well, let me ask you this. Are your casinos like and I'm looking up, there we go. So Richmond is northwest, right?
No, Richmond would be South Vancouver. Yeah, Northwest Canada, Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, we call that part of, so yeah, okay, that's interesting. And I'm just curious, are the casinos on First Nations land?
No, they are not. Some of them are,
Mm.
but the main casino that was, and you might want to look into this. The main casino that was the subject of
I'm
the
going
invest.
to.
Yeah,
This is a major piece of a puzzle here. So,
so it was the River Rock Casino in Richmond, British Columbia. That's the main casino that was the source of a lot of the money laundering, and the the puzzling thing about it all is that it's happening in plain sight where everyone can see it. And politicians, I mean, again, there are certain politicians involved in the municipal politics, the provincial politics that have ties to the CCP, have received funding from the CCP. And for people listening to this, if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go and check out Andy Lee on X. She's a fantastic investigative journalist who's been
yeah, she's
covering this.
wonderful.
And all of these investigations go nowhere, because once you realize where the money's coming from, you realize it's much bigger. But they don't operate in the way that we would expect. And I think most people expect, huge organizations like the CCP to make giant maneuvers, to buy, Fox Studios or something. But the way you described it is exactly the way they operate. They start on the ground, with like, 5 people starting an organization in a community center basement. That's where it starts. And then it slowly grows and builds.
Uh-huh. And if you would like, I can explain to you the recruitment and basically operational way of getting assets, and it's the same all over the world.
Yeah,
They
please
just
do.
have a lot more people doing it. So the reason why a lot of people will say, they might question you and say, yeah, but I mean, if it gets that bad, surely someone's going to say, screw the money, and and that's thought of. So when you recruit an asset, you don't know, most of the time you recruit them unwittingly. They don't know, or they pretend not to know who you work for. You come as, and this is the same in competitive intelligence. We had sources. You come at them as another company and you offer them a lot of money for a relatively simple task. So for instance, you've probably seen those services where you can give your expertise to a consultation over the phone, and then they pay you. And it's like 45 minutes. I would do that all the time. And as a real company, I'd say, your expertise is just amazing, whether it was or not. The way I'd find that person is I'd go to LinkedIn and look for the person with the longest resume, because I know that person needs an audience.
Right.
And I'd recruit them by saying, hey, love to learn more about your company. And they'd always say, oh, I have an NDA. I don't know if I can. And I'd always go with like a parts manager or someone down, because parts managers have access to all the databases and all the people. Everyone knows a parts manager. And so that level of person. And then I would say, okay, I understand you have an NDA. Um, it's only going to be like 6 phone calls. I can only pay you 375 an hour for each call, but I understand you don't want to violate your thing. If you have any friends that are interested, I really appreciate, but certainly don't want you to feel uncomfortable. There's nothing nefarious here. It's just you teaching me about your industry. When you say 375 an hour, they always call back. And they'll call you back on a Sunday afternoon and say, oh, I talked to my manager. He says, okay, yeah, you did not talk to your manager. And so once they're taking your money, now they've already crossed the line. And those first few calls, you don't even ask for anything. You ask them to tell you about themselves, but you're conditioning them to tell you things.
Mm.
And then you overpay them. If they talk for 13 minutes, they get a full hour. If they talk for 37 minutes, they get a full hour. If they talk for a minute and one, they get 2 hours. So this becomes part of their economy. They start buying things they couldn't afford without me in the picture. And now they're hooked on me like fentanyl. And then if I feel like they're wavering or they're getting in trouble, I'm going to do one of two things. If they're valuable, I'm going to reach out to my other assets, say in their competitor, and get them hired over there. So now I've moved my network over there, but I've left one behind here, because I'm also having that person bring me their friends. So you see the way it spreads.
Yeah.
Now, if they get too nervous or something, I'll finally just tell them, hey, you've been spying on your own company and taking money for it. So you can quit. And I can also call my friends in the media and make sure that you're a superstar. And now I've got them. So that's your negative reinforcer, but I'm going to keep paying them. And so now I own them. And this happens with the CCP or any intelligence, effort. You hook people by money, they take the money, you lie to them about who they're working for because there are no rules on that side of the coin. There's rules for them, not for us, not for espionage, if you would. And I'm speaking in the present tense just to tell this story. I don't do this work now. I actually help companies detect this work now
Mhm.
to specifically fight the CCP. Um, but that's how it's done. So you could see, like, you create these networks of people who are recruiting for you. Hey, this guy pays a lot of money. I don't know, and then they're taking money. Now you own them all. And you usually have one guy at the top of your network that knows, like, yeah, he crossed a line. And it's almost like a CI that the cops get, like a confidential informant. Do what I say or you're going to jail, but I'm still going to pay you for it. And that's how that works. And that's how these people get hooked. And with the Chinese, they have so many people. And keep in mind, in communist China, there's the national, I think it's called the national intelligence or the national security law. Everyone who goes abroad, every citizen that goes abroad from China has to turn in their phone and their photos. And the CCP takes all that as intelligence because they believe in this approach of, I think they call it 1,000 grains of sand, where you collect everything because something might be useful in the future. And it's very effective. And they can do that because everyone in China is essentially a spy. And that's not me. That's the New York Times saying that. And if you look up that law, it's chilling. So, if you're ever your buddies over there from Beijing over at the college, don't take a selfie with them because you're going to have your own file over a CCP headquarters. And that's not, judgment on him. He's got no choice because if they don't do it, their family's back there in China and they will disappear them. They will make life miserable for them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when people think of intelligence, they always imagine like rooms full of guys with headphones listening to wiretaps and code breaking and stuff. But what you described is really the way of you gather intelligence. You're boots on the ground, you're doing the legwork, you're making contacts and connections and kind of working your way through the organization. Now, just in terms of data collection, you brought something to mind. The TikTok, the app. It's a very popular app here in North America. Does TikTok play a role in the data collection for the CCP?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So TikTok, I believe, is owned by ByteDance, which I believe is owned by Tencent. And these are all, keep in mind, every company in China has to have like a third of the board has to be CCP. They did the whole military civil fusion back in November of 2021, I believe. And that means every company is part of the military industrial complex. So if anyone tells you, like, oh, you just think everyone over there is working with the CCP, well, yeah, by law they are. So anyways, it's two things. Now, TikTok's interesting because it combines a couple, and without a doubt, 100%, that is a tool of our enemy. So it collects all your data from your phone immediately. It's also it's collecting your voice and it's collecting your image. So there's a lawsuit someone brought to me, and I think it was in Pennsylvania, where they were using people's images, someone on the back end of, TikTok, using people's images, young kids, and superimposing their faces. They were remasking them into pornography, and which is horrible and disgusting. But so little Johnny all of a sudden is Johnny Steele over in whatever country his face ends up. And he thinks he's just making funny videos on TikTok. They're also doing the geolocation data. I mean, it's banned from our government now. They can't have TikTok on their phones anywhere in the federal government, thank God. But TikTok should be banned internationally from everyone because That is a tool of the enemy. It's a propaganda tool, as well as a covert influence tool. So it sets the stage, then it broadcasts on that stage, covert influence propaganda. But it's also collecting everything people say. So think about the implications of that. When I was doing, private intelligence, I might want to target a CEO back in the day. So I'd get on these online games and meet their kids. Okay. And then their kids are talking to me, and it sounds creepy and gross, but it's not. Well, it is, I guess. But the kids would talk to me, and then I could just say, man, my dad sucks. Yeah, my dad sucks. He's going on the conference next week, and he was supposed to take me to the game. I'm like, okay, CEO so and so is going on the conference. And that's how kids are used in that. So if you think about it, they know everyone's number. They've done enough due diligence where they know, okay, this number here is registered to this adult. This adult works for this company. We're going to target that whole network of phones that have TikTok. And they're going to learn everything, not only about that family, but what that dad is doing, that sort of thing. And so you can see where, again, they just burrow right in. And TikTok is, I mean, that is literally like a hand-sized Trojan horse in everyone's back pocket. Like, my son, thank God, who's 12, he had to suffer through being made fun of by his cousins and his friends for not having TikTok. And he listens, and he's smart, and he researches, and he told them the same thing I'm telling you, but he said it to a bunch of 12-year-olds. It's like, well, you guys do whatever you want, but blah, blah, blah. And now none of them have TikTok on their phone. They're like, ugh. So yeah, TikTok, they call it the digital fentanyl. It's a collection tool. It technically could be used as a targeting tool if you think about it. I mean, a forward observer is someone who spots the enemy, gives a great coordinate, and they drop a bomb on their heads. So it could be used for that because it could track you. And it could also be, and it's also being used for propaganda, as we can see with these pro-Palestine protests, and the letter to bin Laden, from bin Laden, which went viral yesterday on TikTok.
Yeah, you know what's, I saw like a video on X, some young person talking about the bin Laden and how they were justified in doing what they were doing. And I was just like, what? Like, what planet are we on? But, again, I think, that's a long conversation unto itself. But I do think it's a result of being on apps like TikTok and not really knowing history, not really knowing, what led
Right.
up to 9/11 and what came out of 9/11. The crazy thing is now, like, I have a 12-year-old as well. TikTok is absolutely banned from our home.
Good for you.
I mean, not just for the data collection part, but the propaganda as well. I noticed very early on that there were a lot of videos that were promoting a certain ideology that were very much promoted by TikTok. And for me, the way I look at it is I don't want my children politicized at all in any way. I don't care what ideology it is or what side of the political fence it's coming from. Let kids be kids. I don't Keep your fucking politics to yourself. They don't need to hear it,
Good for you,
Um,
man. That's good
but
parenting, actually, I think.
well, thank you, thank you. But I did want to ask you about this because I've heard, and I don't know for sure, but in China, the videos that are promoted on TikTok have to do with academics and mathematics and things like that. Whereas in North America, the videos that are promoted on TikTok have to do with this
Yeah.
neo-Marxist postmodern ideology. Now, obviously, that's by design, but can you confirm if that's true? Is that what's actually happening there?
It's not only true, it's absolutely true. And they also promote a lot of anti-Black videos on the Chinese side. It's very racist. You know, China's a very racist country. I'll say it for the record. I mean,
Yeah,
during the pandemic, they had signs out that said no blacks could come into this restaurant.
yeah,
So yeah, they're promoting, they still do these videos of like five Chinese guys beating up like a black tourist, and they've got the music going, people are cheering on like this is fun. So yeah, that's absolutely true. And in China, there's a mandatory time limit. Like you can only use TikTok for a set amount of time
yeah.
because they know what it is. And people here are just stupid. I mean, I'm sorry, it's mental weakness. You know when you're addicted to something. And trust me, I've gone down my Twitter addiction rabbit holes, and I've gone down my Fortnite addiction rabbit holes. They're fun, you know, they activate parts of your brain and you get that instant dopamine. But at the same time, you know when you are because you feel like you just, it's the same feeling you get when you eat 3 Snickers bars instead of taking the time to cook a burger. You feel horrible. And people have to have some discipline and get outside. And you know when you're wasting away. Hell, you can look on TikTok and see yourself wasting away. So people are stupid when they just think they don't even think about things like I can be propagandized or manipulated. And to a lot of them, what we're talking about is science fiction, like it doesn't exist. And I did want to just clarify one point earlier. We talked about the types of intelligence. There are people with the headphones and everything, and it's a discipline. So there's signals intelligence, SIGINT. The stuff I'm talking about is human or human intelligence, but there's imagery intelligence, open source, and so all the ints, as we used to call them. And I started my career in signals intelligence. So when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's just funny because I've read a few books about intelligence and just the way that intelligence is gathered, and it's always been fascinating to me how most of the work is done by just the way you explained it, like going to a grocery store and having a conversation with a target, and just how much information that you can pull from them just through a simple 30-second interaction. And a lot of it is that, you know, it's just in our minds, I think in the minds of people like me or just average everyday people, we always just imagine like spy planes and like escaping from the Russians and Kalishnikovs firing as you run out of the building, you know. But a lot of times
All
it's just,
exists.
yeah, yeah. But a lot of times it's just, you know, going to the hardware store and talking to the guy, you know, in the aisle as he's building a filter or building something in his home. You know, it's yeah, it's fascinating. So once TikTok collects all this data, and I mean it's got to be millions of terabytes per minute, right? Is it a situation where they just store them in massive data storage facilities? And I would imagine they probably have some form of AI combing through whatever data to find whatever they're looking for. Is it like that, or is it more rudimentary?
Well, no one really knows for sure because it's, you know, it's the CCP. So we research and we make our best estimate, but it would have to be a large data center. You would undoubtedly need AI, but you just really a powerful database. You know, that's, you know, a relational database with keywords or long form searches like Google, that type of structure. And they might very well be using Google, just like a lot of our government actually uses Google for their internal stuff for
Right.
searches. Um, but you know, yeah, so it'd be something like that. What they're going to be searching for is based on what you would call in our world um, IRs or PIRs. So intelligence requirements are like the topic question, and then PIRs are priority intelligence requirements. So for instance, I want to find out everything about the CCP would be the IR, or and then under that you'd have like where is our major headquarters? Where is this? Where is that? Who is that? Who's that? The who, when, where's, why's are going to be in those PIRs. In competitive intelligence, these are called key intelligence topics. And underneath those, you have intelligence topics or key intelligence questions. So it's all directed from on high, and it goes out to the different assets, different disciplines to collect on certain things. So if you go back and do the research, I have not, but I want to, you know, it'd be interesting to see how they did our, you know, collection on us as a population. And I imagine they did it by city to see what would resonate with different demographics with these large propaganda platforms. And that would mean there were community people in and among us, which could have easily been done. What's the best way to do that in America, if you had to guess? HHS,
Mm.
community influencers, the same people pushing vaccines. Because if you read those programs, it's community influencers going into the communities. Census, you know, you ever know census people never can just, you know, collect their card. They always have to make conversation with you.
Yeah.
Same thing with NGOs looking for donations, especially on the left. And I'm not saying they're working for the Chinese. What I am saying is the Chinese has access to that data they're collecting.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to collect.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so I wanna pivot toward politics now and the CCP's influence over Western politics. Now, here in Canada, we have a massive problem with CCP donors donating directly to our federal Liberal Party, which is the party that's currently in power here, Justin Trudeau and his band of ghouls. Um, and so in the United States, what like do you have an idea of the level of the CCP's influence?
Well, I know that Xi Jinping and his boyfriend Gavin Newsom are on a date right now in California, and our own president went out to California like a vassal because after hosting Gavin Newsom for the last week or so in China, now they're back here. They're on this whirlwind tour, and our own president went out there like like a servant. Went to Xi Jinping in our own country. So I would say the corruption is right to the top. And I would say it corrupts, I want to say it corrupts probably as much as the Belt and Road is spread across the world. 64% would be my guess is corrupt by the CCP, either primarily or secondarily.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I think we're dealing with something similar here in Canada. It's frightening, and if you know the history of the CCP, and you go all the way back to Chairman Mao. He was courting the United States way, way, way back. I mean, even in the early days.
We made him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Would you mind going into that a little bit?
Yes. So I'm really bad with dates so I'm not going to quote any dates, but here the overview is basically um, we wanted we wanted a big hammer against the Japanese, and we also wanted down the line a balance to the USSR. That's when we found China. Now, at the time, Shanghai Shek and the nationalists were very much they were in charge of the country. They pretty much chased, the communists like to the western region where they're kind of just fading out and dying. I mean, because Mao and his boys they were around for a long time. But then it was the United States that went to the nationalists, and by the accounts of some historians, kind of strong armed the nationalists into arming the communists to help fight against the Japanese. But then we betrayed by some historians' accounts, uh, Chiang Kai shek and the nationalists and moved the communists into power, hoping we'd have a balance against the USSR, which is just dumb. I don't know why we do this all the time. We're doing it now. You don't arm your enemies.
Yeah.
And later on in the 80s, the USSR came to us and they said, hey, don't arm these people. We got duped too. And a lot of people believe that it wasn't the United States that took down the USSR. Remember, there's that whole, it's like the arms race bankrupted them. That's the tale we're told. But you talk to a lot of people, Cold Warriors on the Russian side, they'll say, no, it was the Chinese. We were just giving them so much, and they took most of Siberia and most of our timber, and we couldn't get them out. They blame a lot of them blame the Chinese as the fall of the USSR. So that's a broad overview, but that's how it went because we really believe that if you give them enough America, enough capitalism, soon they'll be driving around with minivans and soccer ball stickers on the back. And that's just Western hubris.
Yeah.
Plus, people were making a lot of money. It was George Herbert Walker Bush that really, really helped, move them into the powerhouse they are after Tiananmen Square, where they said, hey, you know what? We're not going to punish you like we should have. No, we're going to make you our supply chain capital, and then we're all going to make a lot of money. Thinking, we can, these are nice Chinese people. We'll be able to control them. Well, no, you can't.
No.
It's like being the mother of dragons in Game of Thrones. if they get too big, you can't control them. You could just hope they still like you.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting to me is, like, the United States had Nixon going over to China after Mao supplied Chinese foot soldiers for the Korean War. The Korean War was largely Mao's war. People don't realize that. I mean, he was playing both sides of the fence, and really just what he was trying to do was get a nuclear bomb out of Russia. And Stalin knew he was a psychopath. Stalin knew he was crazy, and just knew there's no
Totally.
way. It was Khrushchev who gave him the ability. Anyways, we're getting into a history lesson. It really doesn't matter at this
No, and
point. But
Mao hated Khrushchev too.
oh,
Hated him.
yeah, deeply, like deeply hated him. And that
Yep.
was really when he tried to start courting the United States heavily to get away from Russia. But by then, I think the US kind of had a little bit, at least a little bit, caught on to what he was doing and what he was up to. And he had already detonated nuclear bombs in northern
Uh-huh.
China. And they were aware that he had nuclear power. He just didn't have a delivery system. It's a super fascinating story. Mao was a very,
Really is.
he really was a very specific, sadistic type of psychopath. He's the only dictator that I can think of who was a sadist for the sake of being a sadist. He really didn't have any purpose other than just sadism.
He was pretty nasty too. If you read The Private Life of Chairman Mao,
Mhm.
which was written by his personal doctor, like he didn't bathe. Like he'd
No.
just get these sponge. I think he's kind of big, and but I do wonder sometimes if he kind of like the old, was a Caligula or someone, or Nero or someone like. I do wonder sometimes if Mao had syphilis or something like that that eventually affected his brain.
Yeah, so it's thought that he died from Lou Gehrig's disease, but it's entirely possible that it was syphilis or something like that, right? Because he had a lot of questionable sexual relationships. He had a
Yeah.
pretty bad sexual addiction, and he's a very interesting guy to read about, because if you read his early writings, he actually talks a lot about subjective reality, which is the early seeds of postmodernism. Yeah, he in his early writings
Interesting.
he talks about his subjective reality being the only reality that's real to him, and thus the suffering of others not having any impact on him or having any consequence to him because of his own subjective reality. Yeah, I'm actually
I want your book list. I want your book list. I'll give you mine after the show, definitely.
yeah, I'm actually writing a piece about that right now, because it's like the early seed of postmodern. And I don't know if postmodern thought existed before that, but he kind of lays it all out. And I think it was 1923 in one of his diary entries. And it's fascinating to read because it's a glimpse inside the mind of a man who would go on to murder over 70 million people and do it with complete and total utter lack of care for anything. He wasn't interested in being a great leader. He wasn't even really power was his only motivation. And really what he wanted to do was take over the world. And that's why he created his superpower program, which led to first the Great Leap Forward and then the Cultural Revolution. It was all about power, and it was all about taking over the world. And he didn't care how many Chinese had to die in order for that to. In fact, he viewed the Chinese people as cannon fodder. He viewed them as being expendable. During the Korean War, he said that he will throw as many Chinese to be chewed up by the American machine as is necessary to defeat America. That's how much of a psychopath this man was. He would sacrifice every man, woman, and child in his country to defeat America during that war.
But it's also, and I agree totally, and I'm serious about that book list because I want to read about that. I have a
Absolutely.
lot of friends that are more following the modernism and all that, but they'd like to read about that as well. But I would also say that's the nature of communism because there is no individual. There's the party and the state. So the Russians, I mean, the Russians would do, or the Soviets would do the same thing in live fire exercises. Like they would, I remember when I was training, I was, may or may not have heard real Russian traffic, but I'm reading this transcript and I said, what war is this that like all these people are dying in? And that it wasn't a war, it was a live fire exercise where they'd use real bullets and use real soldiers because the individual doesn't matter. And if you look at a lot of the language we see in our politics today, it's about community and it's about collective. It's actually one of the major organizing platforms. And if you've seen some of my other coverage, it was about these platforms that are helping organize these protests. One of them is called Open Collective,
Yeah.
and there's never talk about the individual. And in our politics, I can't even say the left. I would say the neo-Marxists, because that's how I view them. Because there's some Republicans in there too.
Yeah.
Um, it's always about do it for grandma, do it for your neighbor. Don't, yeah, you might have a strong constitution, but what about the person that doesn't? It's always about this. And look, I'm all about community, don't get me wrong, but the community I choose and how I choose to interact with that community. And that's really the difference is they want to tell you, build the community and make the community and shove you into it and then tell you how to be a community. Whereas we're just most people nationalists and especially populists, we got it. We know how to make a community. We understand the importance of it, but we don't want that mandated because that might be an asshole community and I want to go with the nice people community. I don't want to be in that community, and that's just
Yeah.
freedom. But there's this collective, they rarely, if you notice, like Democrats rarely talk about the individual unless they're on the campaign trail. Then you hear a lot of I's and me's. So it's interesting when you talk about Mao and just using people like fodder. It's how they view the world. Like they view the world as you are not important. The community is important, unless you're talking about the person telling you that. So Hillary Clinton will tell you, think about your community. HHS or CDC will tell you, think about the community. But at the same time, they're not following their own advice because in their own realm, they're the most important thing because they're the only ones smart enough to lead said community because
Yeah.
of power.
Yeah, and on that note, it's the reason why communities of faith are often targeted heavily, because within, say, for example, within the Christian faith, there is a heavy emphasis on individualism. Even though
Mhm.
you're a part of a community, a lot of, like, if you read the Bible, a lot of what is talked about, for example, come out and be separate, right? The idea is that the relationship to God is a singular function, however, part of a larger community. And so communities of faith are often targeted heavily for that, because it's that singular function amongst that greater community that creates the unity. And that's why they go after it. Now, I want to talk about the neo-Marxist ideology, because here in Canada we have a woke prime minister. I mean, we're in the depths of woke here, and I think in the United States through Joe Biden, you guys are starting to slowly sink deeper and deeper and deeper, and almost kind of get toward Canada's level. So
No,
that
no, we're not starting. We're flapping around right now, treading water, trying to stay afloat.
Yeah, so that neo-Marxist pipeline, right? I mean, and it's obviously coming from China, because the form of Marxism that we have here in the West most closely resembles Maoism. I mean, you can break it down to the fine details, and they're almost mirror images of each other. So is that pipeline coming purely through media?
No, I mean, it's coming through media, it's coming a lot through schools. And this is, brings up a lot through schools, ton through business, a lot through your local chambers of commerce. Um, Media is a huge one, and I would recommend anyone, Epic TV, Lee Smith, he's a wonderful journalist, and um, you know, a friend, not a close friend, but we met and we've done an interview. But he did this 6-part series on China that I would highly recommend people watch. And the name escapes me right now, but it was excellent. But it comes through everything, just like the warfare. An important thing that a lot of, I think, Westerners have trouble really understanding is they start at the generational level. Okay, so the influence that you're seeing right now, it started, a generation ago through the colleges, through the parents. And that's why you see all these college kids now are, and you've seen like this progression, every generation gets a little more Marxist. Well, that's because that's the whole point of like the Confucius Institutes. I forgot what they changed the name to now. They're still around, but that's the point, is you get them in the cradle and then they don't even know what democracy is or freedom is, because everything, their whole reality is based around this neo-Marxist ideology. I would say we're a little behind you guys on this. What I have noticed is in Canada, people will say they're neo-Marxists publicly, like it's not a bad thing. Where
Yeah.
I haven't seen anyone here say we're not there yet. That's shocking to me when I saw, um, well-known writer say that on Twitter, I believe, like neo-Marxist, or like I'm a neo-Marxist or something. The good thing about being a neo-Marxist, that's shocking to me. I mean, can you imagine that 20 years ago? You get run
Yeah.
out of town.
Yeah, well, in Canada, the big problem that we have is apathy, and not the thing about Canada. We've had it too good for too long. In the United States was born out of war, right? The United States was born out of conflict. So culturally, you guys are far more independent, far more patriotic, and far more concerned with preserving and maintaining the ethics and values that created your country. Here in Canada, we started as a British colony. We slowly grew over time, and we've had it really good, thanks mostly to the success of the United States and Britain. So we've never really been on our own. We've never been in a situation where we had to face down communism. Yeah, we fought communism, I guess, during the Cold War alongside the United States, but we were never the main target. We were not America. We're not the world power, right? So we generally were overlooked. And the point that I'm making here is that people have never had to fight here. They don't understand what that means. They don't get it. It's like when you talk, you're talking from the perspective of a US military veteran who loves his country, who served his country. We don't get that here. Canadians don't get that. That's why our military is so tiny, right? And always has been, because we've never had to fight. We've never been faced with a Pearl Harbor moment or a
But
9/11.
you guys, I mean, your soldiers are. If sorry to interrupt you, I just want to
Yeah.
say I've worked with the Canadian Special Forces when I was stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington State. They were fantastic, and but I see what you're saying. It's a smaller population of that. But those guys were top notch, and I know they love their country. I'm not contradicting you. I'm just saying I see what you mean. It's probably a smaller population of that than the United
Yeah.
States has. Is that weird?
Yeah, I'm not trying to say anything bad about the Canadian military, because I have a lot of people in my personal life who serve. But those people generally come from the more rural communities. I'm talking more about metropolitan Canadians. We
It's the
just
same thing here, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing here.
Yeah, I guess it does have to do with the fact that we are 10% the size of the United States, right? And so, we have 40 million people here. You guys, I think, are at like three. I mean, it's growing every day due to the immigration crisis you have going.
333.
Yeah, something like
It's like
that.
333 million. Some. Well, who knows?
Yeah. So
Because
actually, that
we
brings
have
up a
millions have come through, so
yeah
we don't
that
know how big our
that that
population is.
brings up a good topic. I want to ask you about that. The immigration crisis currently in the United States. I mean, you guys are seeing. I mean, just the numbers are so astronomical, and people don't understand what that does to an economy. I mean, it absolutely pulverizes the economy, because you have to house these people. These people have to eat food. If they have to get jobs, if they can't get jobs, then they go on social assistance. I mean, it's just the economic damage this creates is just completely unparalleled. So do you have an idea of is there an agenda at work here for all of these immigrants flowing across the southern border?
Yes, absolutely. It's part of the larger agenda of erasing the United States as a national identity and as a country. So I don't believe we're going to have a Red Dawn moment where, CCP paratroopers or PLA paratroopers are coming from the sky. The invasion and the war has begun. It's been going on for a while, but this is one of the final moments where now you're flooding a country with immigrants from every country you can imagine. I mean, as far as Africa and China, I don't know the amount that's come through. I do a show on dailyclout.io with my good friend JJ Carroll. And he retired after 24 years on the border. And he wrote a book about it called Invaded. I highly recommend it because he gets into the nitty gritty of it. But yeah, it's part of it because it overwhelms, like you said, it overwhelms our social systems, it overwhelms our medical systems, it overwhelms our economy. And we're seeing that right here in, like, I'm in Brooklyn, New York right now. And the, they announced, Mayor Eric Adams announced yesterday in I read this in the Gothamist, that they're making cuts to the police and sanitation to accommodate the illegal immigrants.
That's
And
insane.
that's the thing. And I won't call them migrants because they're not working.
Mhm.
Migrants have to work to be migrants, and so that's a little rebranding I've been battling. But yes, they announced yesterday that they're cutting sanitation, making cuts to sanitation and the police. Oh, and he, back to that whole community nonsense, he's calling on the community to step up because they need safety officers at the schools. So they want parents who work all day, who are paying 46% in taxes if you're upper middle class, now to put in some extra time to keep the kids from shooting each other and keep the schools safe. Like, what the hell are you paying taxes for? It's like all the money is going to people that don't live here. I'm all for immigration. I'm the son of an immigrant dad, but I mean, this is an invasion any way you look at it. And I will say 19,000 by the last count of JJ and his sources, Chinese fighting age men
Yes.
who are flying to the Bahamas, buying boats and landing on our shores like an invasion. And it's like, how's this not news? So in addition to those programs you said it endangers, I mean, think about how many Taliban and ISIS and Al Qaeda have come through. And
Yeah.
I will say this is not just me guessing. JJ sources, we had the readouts, from I'm guessing one of his sources computer screens, but it was a guy from 1960. He was born in 1963, and he was so that would have, and he's been fighting in ISIS and Al Qaeda. That's like a senior commander type dude, and that tells you he was probably Mujahideen before all of that. And so he's going way back. And if you're born in 1963 and you're in those groups and you're still alive, you're one tough dude. Well, he's like the general commander level. 3 days apart from that guy's, and he arrived at the southern border in Texas 3 weeks ago, and they detained him. This is like we're talking like just below like the Osama bin Laden level, and they let him go into our interior.
Oh my
And then there was a guy, the assistant to President Ghani from Afghanistan, who fled. He showed up, and same thing. Senior level guy in security and operations detained him, let him go into our border. No one knows where these people are. They get these paper summons. And so, what I was telling JJ while we were talking about this, he said, "What do you think this means?" I said, "Well, I studied warfare and paramilitary operations and then conducted them most of my adult life. And I will say this: the first people to arrive, if you're going to attack or invade a country, the first people you deploy are your intelligence assets. Okay, they're followed by your your artillery, broad strokes here. Those are followed by first your special forces to act as forward observers, people to spot targets, to call in artillery. This is conventional minded. But then you call in the artillery. Okay, and I always say, what is artillery? What does artillery do? Well, it levels cities and leaves them as rubble. I would say that riots are the same thing as artillery.
God.
And so the artillery is dropping now. And then you deploy your foot soldiers. Those would be your bombers in this case, or your people just shooting people. And then the last people to arrive before any major operation are the generals. And I can say this I'm pretty certain that the generals, with the existence of these two guys and more, but these two types of guys, the generals have arrived.
Whoa. Okay. Man, that's intense. So, okay. It was interesting when you said that, with the riots, because there's an ideological component too, right? Like with these pro-Palestinian demonstrations, there's a because they're perceived as being oppressed and I would say rightfully victimized, that there's an added component where, the usual, police and military uniform breaking up these demonstrations and beating people over the head with batons isn't happening because of the ideological component. So essentially, this group is allowed to continue to grow and to continue to grow in intensity in terms of, violence and other things, right? Now, I guess I wasn't going to ask you this question because I've heard this tossed around and I'm not exactly sure what to think about it. But now that you've gone there, do you think that we're seeing a potential for an American civil war? Between naturalized Americans or born and raised Americans versus immigrant cells, terrorist cells that have come through the southern border, that have been activated by these generals that are now within the United States. I mean, am I going too far out there here, or is that something that we could see? I mean,
No, you're not. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, I mean, maybe not a civil war to the degree like of the previous American Civil War. So I'm talking maybe smaller battles that will exist in major American cities. Is that something that we could see in the future?
Well, that's what you call a counterinsurgency because they're not Americans, right? So if people are here in their terror cells and people fight them, well, they're fighting an insurgency. So
Right.
it'd
Okay.
be a domestic counterinsurgery, yeah, counterinsurgency. So I wouldn't call it a civil war. I would call it, a defensive counterinsurgency. I keep going back to that. Um, much like much like Red Dawn, we were talking about that last night. So JJ and I, but yeah, that's what it is. Now it's interesting you say that because it's the neo-Marxists that have been kind of floating this idea of civil war in the media, as you've seen, and I'm sure that's probably where you first heard it mentioned.
Yeah.
So if I guess whoever's in charge, if they're calling these invaders, these cells, Americans, then I guess they can call it a civil war. So it gets really murky, but I would just say to people, defend your home, no matter what,
Hmm.
because if you defend your home, you don't have to identify your enemy. They're going to identify themselves, and so that's people ask me like what they can do, like defend your home and defend your family. If everyone does that, we'll be fine. Um, but what's interesting about what you say as well is that there was a huge surge in border crossings in August and September, like huge seven-figure surges that were huge increases from the months previous. And then right after that, October 7th happens, like the massacre of innocent Israelis. So if you notice, these protests sprung up on October 7th. On October 7th, they started announcing them. And you can and right away I was on this, and I'm not patting myself in the back. The reason why I knew this would happen, and I told Naomi, I said, watch, you're going to see pro-Palestine protests pop up all over this country. And she's like, how do you know? And I said, well, I just went to actionnetwork.org or Open Collective and I see what they're planning. They say it. And she's like, how do you know to go there? Well, that was easy because those are the same people that did all the pro-abortion after the Roe v. Wade thing in
Hmm.
2022. It's the same people that did BLM. These are all the same people, and that's what people fail to realize. Like this is not organic. It's not organic at all. It's the same signs. It's the same organizers, and it's starting more and more to look like. And she's been in the news lately. Jody Evans of Code Pink is behind it. It kind of connected to a lot of these things. I've got her connected to the whole anti-Supreme Court protest where one of our Supreme Court justices was actually targeted for assassination. They caught the guy. Um, but Code Pink, I have them attached on the Open Collective and Action Network side. Code Pink was organizing these weird like pro-Palestinian protests here in New York City where they were targeting the elementary school children to cheer for Palestine. And I would caution children to not try to find Palestine on the map because there is no Palestine, except if you talk to China, who was the first country ever to recognize Palestine as a country. Um, I'm sure it's just a coincidence. But the point is, at the core of this, you see the same people. Now, her husband, Jody Evans' husband, is a guy named Neville Royce Singham, who the New York Times amazingly and surprisingly actually did this whole expose on this couple. I don't know what their motivation is, but how he is enmeshed with these major media outlets in China and actually has an office in Beijing. And he's floating money to all sorts of different NGOs, a lot of which happen to be behind all the same protests.
Wow. Okay. So
Do you kind of see the connection there?
yeah, can you describe Code Pink, Action Network, and Open Collective, just as to who they are and what they do?
Yeah, so let me just, I don't know much, admittedly, about Code Pink, except just by name. They're just a general, you know, nonprofit that protests a lot of things. I think they popped up during the Bush administration to protest the war. Um, and there's a shift. I mean, they were protesting all the same things that liberals would protest. And then there was a shift away from China at some point. I think it's probably right around the time she got married. I'd have to check the timing on that. Now, the other two, Action Network and Open Collective, these are tools. Okay, these are actually not groups. These are companies, and they're really just glorified customer relationship management tools or CRMs. And so, if you ever wonder how, like BLM or the protests up in your neck of the woods with the mass graves in the schools, which
Yeah.
actually turned out in some cases there were none. Um, you ever wonder why those pop up so quickly? And they all have matching signs and matching T-shirts. Same thing with these pro-Palestinian protests. Well, they're done on Action Network or Open Collective and Fast Action. There's all sorts of them springing up now. So the way it works is, let's say you think that the manatee in Florida needs to be protected, and the only way to protect that manatee is with a violent protest or a protest. So you go to Open Collective, and for $10 to $100 a month, you can enter in your whole contacts list, your artwork. You can connect your Gmail, Google Drive with all your art for your signs and posters, contact lists, hashtags. I'll recommend them if you don't have your own hashtag ideas. And then you start your campaign, or in the case of Action Network, you start your action. And then they help you amplify all your hashtags, all of your, you could actually have your art forwarded to like the local print shop. So the t-shirts and signs are waiting for your protesters. And in some parts of the Action Network website, they don't come out and say it, but they kind of say, oh, they're basically offering, they have an offering where you can kind of get people to protest with you.
So they're basically an agency.
It's like on demand. It's like an on demand app for protests. Now,
Okay.
here's the scary thing about it: they don't care what you're protesting, and they don't care where you live. So, like those pro abortion, pro choice, I guess, to be fair, protests, they were run by three people. So, if you saw the red cloaks and those massive protests in DC and all over our country, three people using opencollective.com to organize those massive protests in almost every state. Three people from an app. And so
That's
think about, if you're the CCP, you don't need
yeah.
to drop artillery on our cities. You can just drop a violent protest through an app.
Yeah, I mean, it's the I mean, it's the easiest way to take down, if a city, a state, even, I mean, especially when you have, a scenario like a George Floyd sort of scenario. I mean,
Exactly.
w-
Look at the damage those protested.
yeah,
Look at the damage. I mean, billions and billions of dollars damage. Like those cities look like they've been hit by artillery.
yeah, oh yeah, and it's hard because we're dealing with, so many cultural components to these scenarios, like with the George Floyd, with his death. It's there's so many things involved, and so by simply just hitting an app, creating a protest that turns into a riot, you're basically opening the can of worms and spilling them out, and creating so much cultural chaos that for that $100 you spent, you're getting millions of dollars worth of results, right?
Yes, yes, you're getting, and you're also dividing. Yeah, you're dividing you're creating chaos in a country, and that's the best time to take out a country. Is you don't want a unified citizenry. You don't want everyone in the country to be on the same page because that was disastrous for the Nazis when they attacked Stalingrad. You know,
Yeah,
whether those people were forced to defend it or not is beside the point. I mean, as the Nazis, I'm sure they would have defended it anyways because what's worse? But the point is, like, that's everyone's nightmare. It's also, it goes into other things. I mean, these are tools to help divide a population, but for the companies, they're making a ton of money too because they act as fiscal hosts and fiscal sponsors for these actions, or an open collective, these collectives. um, they get a cut of all those donations that come in. They're getting their subscription. They're also tied in with like, yeah, like Uber and Lyft.
that's so
So not
crazy.
only your signs to people, you can send them some sandwiches with DoorDash and give them a ride through Uber.
It's, I
And
mean,
so,
it's essentially like you're using an app to mobilize your own army, really,
and when you're on an app, yes, yes, and when you're on an app and behind a screen, it's like a game, right? It's
Yeah.
gamified. Like
Eh,
if you're one of the three people, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, no, please continue, please.
So if you're like one of the three organizers of, if you just look up the SCOTUS 6 hashtag, it all goes back to this LLC called Vigil for Democracy LLC. And then from there, it's like you see they were attached, and it's on their website. They're attached to all these. But for those people who were running those, one guy is sitting there in Florida. Okay, the money behind it, she's sitting in oh, same, sorry, Palo Alto, I think, and California in the Facebook territory. And then I think the other woman who seemed to be the business brain behind the LLC, um, she is, I believe, in the Midwest somewhere. None of them I ever saw at a protest, not those protests. And then there's a fourth guy that I turns out I was a fake person. That the face they used was a heartthrob from the UK from some daytime talk show. So I figure that was probably made by the lady in California who is the only one who would have time to sit home all day and look at English heartthrobs on daytime television. And his name online was Sam Spiegel. I'm pretty sure it was her. Um, but anyways, so yeah, you see that it's like it's so easy to do now, and it's becoming normalized. And I want to really try doing a, kind of like a mock demonstration that won't hurt anyone. I'm pretty sure if I just throw out a hashtag and any demonstration that is basically anti whatever Trump says, then I could probably mobilize 100 people and get them to start burning things down. I want to do that. But you see my point. I don't think it'd be that hard. And I've
Yeah,
seen young people during BLM, some I'm related to, running down to the city. I'm like, why are you going to that? And they're like, why are you not? And I'm like, well, I don't know enough about it. I'm not going to protest anything. That I'm all for the right to protest and expression and all that. If I think something needs to be protested, I certainly protest it. I don't know anything about this. Do you? And they, of course, they don't. But they run to it, and what that plays on, it's a very Joseph Campbell type of like
Mhm.
mentality that's being exploited, where you deny, especially like upper middle class white kids, from any kind of adventure. No contact sports, violence is frowned upon, conflict is frowned upon, arguing in public is frowned upon. This builds up over time. These are natural things that rural kids or kids like me with like 6 Irish brothers and 2 equally tough sisters, we're wrestling all the time, hitting each other with sticks. We've got all that stuff out, but these kids don't. And you just, like a bunch of little simmering pots have built of their whole life. They're being controlled. And I've seen these societies in Manhattan. I've seen these people. I know these people. I'm related to some of these people where we don't do that. We don't argue in public. We don't have conflict. Don't be rude. And then it builds and builds and builds. And then you just basically, they're winding up. And then once you know where to target them, you just throw them down and pull the pin and off they go because they
Yeah,
need that. They're filling in something they've been denied for years. And I've had people tell me that. Why would you go to a violent protest? Well, I feel like this is our Vietnam. I feel like this is our adventure.
yeah. And not to mention, I mean, the added component there is you've instilled in these, especially, middle class white kids, that they're colonizers and settlers, that they're oppressors. And so not only do they have all this pent up anger and energy, they also have this guilt that they're carrying around for their very existence. And I'm Métis. My mom is Plains Cree Indian. I look extremely pale today because of the combination of my camera and the fact that I'm sitting in front of a window.
You said you're Cree?
Yeah, my mom is Plains Cree Indian, so I'm half, and technically you call that Métis. But it's funny
Are
because
you
I've been
enrolled? Sorry.
my brother is. I'm not.
Okay.
It's funny because when you mentioned the mass grave scenario, that's actually one that bothers me a lot because my grandfather actually went through the residential school system up here. He ran away so many times that they stopped looking for him, and he died with a third grade education. He was a business owner, a successful amateur boxer, and died with a third grade education because he just ran away and kept running away to the point where they just stopped trying to find him. And the thing about the mass grave scenario is that it's a myth, and it's something that has long been suspected exists, but you can't just claim that there are bodies where there are no bodies, because what you're doing is you're damaging the credibility of people like my grandfather, right?
Exactly.
And
Because the
so
story is not the bodies, the story is how they got there.
yes, and like the young people that you just spoke about, I've ended up in arguments with people like that before, and I have a magic card. I just whip out my Indian card, and boom, it's over. And I can and what I've said to them a million times is that shouldn't be the end of the argument. That shouldn't be the end. My position on this intersectional bullshit oppression grid shouldn't stop you from being able to voice your opinion and your thoughts, but it is because you're playing a dumb fucking game. And that's what it is, right? That's what it boils down to. It's stupid. And so you have these young people who believe that they're colonizers and settlers and that they've stolen this land from indigenous people and that they're responsible for and accountable for making up for whatever crimes may have happened 200 years ago, 300 years ago. I mean, my God, man, you are turning people into walking time bombs. That's what that is what you are creating. And it's just like what you said,
Yes.
you have an app where you can send these people into whatever city. They have all this pent up anger and guilt and frustration, and it just boils over, and they don't even know why they're behaving the way they're behaving. They don't know why they're looting and burning down stores. They're just doing it because all of this pent up energy combined with the ideology is turning them into a Manchurian candidate, a time bomb. Excuse me.
Well, and you talked about TikTok earlier,
Yeah.
and if you look at there's actually studies about the way these quick reward apps or instant gratification type society, click click click, it does affect the way the brain works, um, which really does create a society that's not going to know why they're protesting because they're just reacting. There's very little proactivity or proactive thought, you may have noticed,
Yeah.
in a lot of these kids. There's also a tendency to give up. Like, I remember being at a party with my wife, and this when we were dating, and this younger guy starts hitting on her. She, and I am kind of across the room, and I'm not one to,
Right.
although I trust her, she can handle herself. But I always keep an eye on it. I'm kind of coming closer, and he just gave up. She's like, "Oh no, I'm here with someone. I have a date." He's like, "Whatever." That's it. Like back in my day, I'd have been like, "What your man got to do with me?" You know.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I mean, unfortunately,
they just give up.
yeah, I think he was barking up the wrong tree. Out of everybody that I've spoken to, Naomi is the person I was most nervous because she definitely has a very kick you through a plate glass window sort of vibe. So I was like definitely like a little bit, you know what I mean? She's a very strong woman, right? And I had a
Yeah.
very strong, very educated. So I had a feeling that if I said something wrong or kind of went off track, that I would get a lecture really quickly. So I was definitely pretty nervous. It was the conversation was completely opposite to that. She's a very wonderful, sweet woman, but yeah,
Well, you
that's
see, when I'm bored, I instigate those arguments because it's like the two Terminators,
right.
we're different versions. Like in Terminator 2, it's like we lock up and we're like, "Arr, arr," like, not physically, of course, but just
Yeah.
watch your eyes. When they go gray, you're in trouble. They stay blue, you're good.
That's awesome. So I guess I know you got to get going pretty soon. I wanna conclude this with the World Economic Forum and the role that the CCP plays, the connection between the two, and what we're seeing, the results that we're seeing here in the West. Now, we've talked about the CCP. The World Economic Forum is another completely, I wouldn't say different,
Mhm.
but another outside monster that we're currently dealing with. Um, do the CCP and the World Economic Forum have like an established connection?
Well, yeah, and Xi Jinping's a member of the World Economic Forum. So they're and they do, and they're all connected in the sense, like, people, there's two camps here. Like, a lot of people I argue with, good friends of mine, very, very, very smart, very well read, um, will argue that no, it's not the CCP behind all this world chaos, it's the World Economic Forum. Both of those things are correct. The problem is they want to see the CCP as a junior partner. The problem with that is that the CCP may not own the World Economic Forum, but it owns most of the people in it, through debt, through business relationships, what have you. And people will say, well, it's the European banking system, SWEF. Correct, but who owns the software? And that's the thing too. And how much of their money is tied up in China that gets nationalized? And then the final thing is, yes, so they are obvious, very, very connected. I think the CCP uses the WEF to get into the WTO, WHO, all these things to get into European society. Because if you've ever done any research on class, and there's a great book called Class by Paul Fussell from like 1986. I think it's only in print. Highly recommend that book. But if you've researched or just been around different classes, I have, through my work, through my relationships. So from the lower income to the out of sights. Um, but they view the CCP, they view China as this provincial. They still view it as, these are provincial people. These are not high class Europeans. So very cleverly, the CCP uses the WEF to get into Europe.
Mhm.
And if you look at the land and look at the institutions in Europe, they've got the same problem we do. And so, do they own the WEF? You can say no, but they seem to own everything that it sits on, that it's tied to.
Mhm.
And they certainly control the WHO, the WTO, and it goes into some ancient strategy. Like, if your enemy is, I think as Sun Tzu said, if your enemy is strong, if you're weak. Well, China is still listed as a developing country in the WTO. I just did a creepy Joe Biden whisper. I apologize, but they're in the video. But so they're literally playing these out, and there's also another one, looking at the world being on fire, and that's you're hearing that said a lot these days. The world is on fire. Uh, in the 36 stratagems of war, which is again these ancient strategies of Chinese warfare. One of them is loot the burning house. And if the house isn't on fire, you set it on fire. Well, the whole world is on fire right now, except for China.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except for China. And
Yeah.
so that's what I tell people. I'm like, why is it that the only country in the world that doesn't have issues, they have issues internally, big time issues, their economy is tanking, but the world's on fire except for China. And then on the WEF thing, look who's going out to California this week to go meet Xi Jinping. He's not going to them. It's a lot of the same people in WEF, going to, pay homage to their master. And he's the guy. And I would end it with this for my very good friends that I disagree with, but I think it is the CCP at the core of everything. Not saying they're responsible for everything. These things do take on a life of their own. These things there are parallel motivations, but the one group with a plan and the means to carry out that plan is the CCP, and that is to control the world by 2049. And the reason why I say, all things aside, if you had to compare the WEF and the CCP, the CCP is the only ones with an army and a navy and an air force and a few billion people. So you could have all the dastardly plans you want if you're Schwab or Harari, these guys, but yet you need boots on the ground to carry them out, and the CCP has that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's any coincidence that, well, in Canada, we just cut another $1 billion from our defense budget. Our general Wayne Iyer, I think he's our main. I don't know what you would call him in Canada, but he's a general, and he testified in front of the House committee that we don't have enough munitions to fight for more than a day in active war right now.
Whoa, what's that? It's the only interview I've been on where I'm taking notes from the interviewer.
His name, I think, is Wayne.
I've learned so much today.
Oh, well, thanks, man. I've learned. I'm going to be parroting pretty much everything you said to everybody I know, and just to make myself sound smarter.
It's a
but
compliment.
yeah, but his name is General Wayne Iyer, and he testified in front of a House committee about the budget cuts from our defense or cuts from our defense budget. And yeah, the Trudeau Liberals have cut $1 billion from our defense budget, and he has said that we do not have enough munitions to fight in active war for more than a day. We cannot defend ourselves against any foreign enemies. And in the United States, I don't think it's any coincidence that this neo-Marxist ideology is chewed through the American military. I mean, it is. When I see Rachel Levine, I'm just blown away that that's an admiral, and what is it? The U.S. Navy is
Surgeon General. They're not really military, but
okay, but it's still, I mean, symbolically, a man wearing a dress and medals on his chest they're
humiliating us using us to humiliate ourselves.
Well, it's the one. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I keep coughing. I have a tickle in my throat. It's the one facet of the United States. It's the one aspect that should be completely off limits to ideology. Completely, 100%. You can play your silly little games in the streets, but the American military has to remain the institution that it has always been, and we've seen it transform. I mean, it seems like overnight. How?
Through the colleges, because they have colleges. They have the officer candidate schools, so OCS, or like the ROTC. So you get the colleges, and then future officers come through the colleges. getting bathed in wokeness or Marxism. And then they're in the military, and officers are now running. Those officers have now crowded out the cold warriors and the enduring freedoms, and they've taken out everything over. Same thing with the FBI. It starts at the colleges, and they bring that ideology with them, and that's how they've infiltrated.
Oh, yeah, and it's I remember seeing Jordan Peterson on the University of Toronto campus when he first popped up on YouTube and was being protested by all these students because he was pushing back against compelled speech. And I remember the argument being, well, they're just kids, let kids be kids. They can say whatever they want, but he was absolutely right. He was like, you let this in the door and it is going to destroy the world. And that's what we're seeing now. We're watching our institutions crumble. I mean, we didn't even talk about COVID vaccines or anything that happened during the pandemic, which I would love to have you back and just discuss that with you, because I've listened to you talk about it, and it's there's so much more to it than most people know. But you know, it's so, I think our perception of the way these transformations happen is completely off. And I think that that's what we missed, is we saw this ideology enter into academia. We all just looked at it like, well, these are just kids, they'll grow out of it. But no, they left academia, they went into politics, they went into business, they went into different aspects of our economies, and now we are seeing the fruits of that.
Well, and that you're absolutely right, and I absolutely just have always been a fan of Jordan Peterson way back before, because I remember those, and I remember I bought his book, the
12 rules
Rules
for
for
life.
Life.
Yeah.
Yes, and I loved it, and I was like, well, this makes sense. I mean, this is not, I mean, you obviously, anytime, by the way, these days, anytime you hear something's racist, you should read it,
Yeah, for sure.
because if they're telling you not to read it, you definitely should read it, because they don't want you to see something in there. But that's the thing, is like he understands. I mean, he's a scholar of communist and Marxist revolutions and throughout history. So he saw that, like, as did I. I'm not at his level. He's very much more learned than I am. He's been at it for a little while longer, but I've seen it. I've seen it in my work with the military. I've seen local uprisings, and they happen quickly, especially on the as of the communist or Marxist flavor. And all one has to do, like you mentioned earlier, is just read any book on the Cultural Revolution and know what the Red Guard is, and
Yeah.
all these type of things. Know what the Mao's little red book is, that's been replaced by Mao's little red iPhone with TikTok on it. So it's the same thing. I mean, it's just the same thing over and over. History does repeat itself, and I just hope the way to get to the youth is to embarrass them in a debate on history, and then they'll say, I'll show you, and go read it. Hopefully they can focus on it long enough to learn it,
Yeah.
because as they learn, they'll realize, oh crap, I got duped. Because it's like those dragons we talked about. You have to be careful. And I think what the neo-Marxists always forget, I mean, what the Marxists always forget is, once you raise a dragon, once you raise a monster, you have to feed it, you have to take care of it, you have to keep it on a leash, or it'll turn against you. And we saw that happen in the Cultural Revolution. I mean, it's happening, it's going to happen here, it's already happening.
Yeah.
These Palestine pro-Palestine, they invaded BlackRock's lobby, which I think was staged. But that's the thing, is they the Marxists will create these monsters, and then when they're done with them, they just cast them aside. That energy is going to go somewhere, and it's going to turn into anarchy. And that's the danger of it. Then we all lose.
Yes. Yes. And the thing about Marxism is that dragon that you're creating, that you're feeding, it will ultimately eat you. No matter what, no matter who you are, it will eat you. I remember Brett Weinstein. I watched a video of when he was originally being purged from Evergreen University, and students patrolling the parking lots with baseball bats looking for him. I was
Yeah.
like, this is the Red Guard all over again. This is teachers being beaten to death with brass belt buckles all over again. We're here. And what blew my fucking mind was that people couldn't see it. And I think it obviously had to do with a lack of knowledge, a lack of knowing what happened in the past, but also just, I don't know, fear, ideological brainwashing them, being brainwashed themselves into this ideology, into thinking that what these young people are doing is justified in any way. It's terrifying. And yeah, Brian, I would love to have you back and talk about the pandemic, the vaccines. I would love to talk to you about BlackRock and Vanguard. You just mentioned that there were pro-Palestinian demonstrators who had taken over a BlackRock lobby. I agree with you. I think it's 100% staged. I think there is a current effort to paint out these gigantic corporations, these hedge funds, and as being somehow targeted. You know what I mean? Like as somehow being on the, on the shit
Right.
end of the stick here. But I know you got to head back out in the field and do your thing. I've kept you for 2 hours. Brian,
Yeah,
hang around after this. We'll say our goodbyes privately, but for now, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
absolutely. And thank you so much. It's a really great
Oh,
conversation. And
thank you.
it's always nice to talk to a student, another student of history, and someone who, you do see the world like I do, and that's from a 360-degree angle. You have to at multi-level. So I look forward to talking to you again. It
Oh,
was a
thank you.
pleasure. So I'm an investigative journalist at dailyclout.io. On Daily Clout, you could find our podcast as well. It's called, and I'd like to have you on it. It's called Unrestricted Invasion, and we just talk. And then my Twitter is Brian O'Shea, SPI, Sierra Papa India. So Brian O'Shea is at Brian O'Shea, SPI on Twitter, on Substack at Brian O'Shea, and then on Getter, the Twitter killer, at Brian O'Shea. Now be careful, because if you put Brian O'Shea on Twitter, you get a guy that's totally opposite of me. If you put the wrong one on either one, you get different people. So just be careful of that. There's a joke in there regarding a certain new book that just came out that I won't touch right now. But anyways, yeah, that's how you find me. And I'm always happy to share what I know and learn, from anyone who wants to contact me. So, but this has been a pleasure. So thank you so much for having me on.
Likewise, man. I learned so much today, and I think you gave me nightmare fuel for the next 5 years of my life. So thank you.
That's what Dr. Drew said too, man. Thank you.